Welcome back to Skytech-Lens. In July 2025, North America's economic unity shattered overnight. President Trump imposed a sweeping 30% tariff on steel, auto parts, and copper from Canada and Mexico, upending decades of seamless trade. For Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, this was the final straw. No longer a negotiation, but an economic blockade. The USMCA's promise of tariff-free access was rendered meaningless, forcing Canada and Mexico to rethink their future. Within days, both nations began urgent talks, not to appease Washington, but to bypass it entirely. The tariffs threatened to cripple their manufacturing sectors, especially the auto industry, which relied on cross-border supply chains. Suddenly, the idea of a Canada-Mexico trade system that excluded the US was no longer fantasy, it was a necessity. Ottawa and Mexico City resolved to build a new economic axis, directly connecting their economies and leaving the US on the sidelines. The stage was set for a bold new trade corridor that would redraw the continent's economic map. Canada and Mexico responded with unprecedented resolve. They unveiled the Northern Corridor, a $120 billion project to create a direct US free trade route between their nations. This was more than retaliation, it was a blueprint for economic independence. Both governments committed billions in seed funding, signaling to investors and industries that this was real. The plan built a logistics network so efficient it would outlast any US policy shift. Two major initiatives anchored the corridor: the Pacific Short Link, a railway from Mexico's industrial north to Canada's Prince Rupert Port, and the Great Lakes Flow Ring, a maritime route from Canada's heartland to Mexican ports via Cuba. These routes would bypass US territory entirely, moving everything from raw materials to finished goods. Mexican factories would receive Canadian steel and minerals without crossing US soil. Finished products would flow north for export to Asia. The project demanded new railways, port upgrades, and a total rethink of North American trade. It was a direct challenge to a century of US-centric economic geography. The Northern Corridor's brilliance lies in its integration of infrastructure and digital technology. A new blockchain-based customs platform allows goods to be pre-cleared by both countries, eliminating border bottlenecks. The Pacific Short Link offers Mexico a faster route to Asian markets, while the Great Lakes Flow Ring lets Canada and Mexico exchange bulk goods without US rail or roads. Shipping costs are projected to drop dramatically, $68 per ton versus $102 through US routes. Energy is central. Canada will export 5 million tons of LNG annually to Mexico, securing a stable energy supply for Mexican factories and a reliable customer for Canada. This energy deal, once meant for the US, cements the alliance's independence. The timeline is aggressive. First shipments are expected within 6 months, with full operation by 2028. By the end of 2026, $69 billion in annual trade will be rerouted away from the US. The goal: make the corridor an irreversible fact before Washington can react. The new map of North American trade is being drawn now, and it's permanent. The message is clear: Canada and Mexico are no longer waiting for US permission. The Northern Corridor is a direct economic blow to the United States. US ports, railways, and trucking firms, long the backbone of North American trade, stand to lose billions in revenue. Customs fees alone could drop by $3.5 billion annually as trade diverts. Inland cargo traffic may fall by 27%, turning logistics hubs like Chicago and Buffalo into economic shadows. The US auto industry, especially Detroit, faces a crisis as supply chains bypass the country. Mexican lithium batteries will go straight to Canadian EV plants, slashing Detroit's output by 360,000 vehicles a year. The ripple effect: over 108,000 indirect jobs lost in the Midwest, draining $12.7 billion from regional incomes. California, losing access to Canadian LNG, will pay $3.1 billion more annually for electricity. A policy meant to protect American industry has instead cut the US out of lucrative trade and energy deals. The unintended consequence: American workers and businesses pay the price for isolation. The Northern Corridor is more than an economic pivot. It's a strategic leap into the future of global trade. Canada and Mexico have embedded a green strategy, leveraging Canada's low-emission steel and Mexico's growing battery sector. With Europe's carbon border adjustment mechanism, goods with lower carbon footprints gain a price edge. The corridor's supply chain, free from US emissions and tariffs, positions Canada and Mexico as preferred suppliers to Europe. European automakers, under pressure to decarbonize, will find Canadian-Mexican EVs and batteries especially attractive. This alliance leapfrogs the US, aligning with the next generation of global trade rules. Canada and Mexico are building a 21st century partnership, sustainable, strategic, and globally competitive. The corridor is not just a workaround, it's a new model for economic statecraft. The Northern Corridor is set to permanently reshape North America. Once $120 billion in infrastructure is built, the economic incentives to use the new routes will be overwhelming. Even if US tariffs are repealed, the new trade patterns will endure. The continent's economic wiring will be changed. America's role as the indispensable land bridge is ending. Canada and Mexico now have options, collaborating without US consent. Washington's leverage over its neighbors is diminished, and the continent's balance of power is shifting. As Canada and Mexico integrate, they'll look increasingly to each other and to global partners like the EU. The US risks isolation, walled off by its own protectionism. The Northern Corridor is a cautionary tailbrake trust, and partners will build new bridges, leaving you behind. North America's future is being rewritten, and the US may find itself watching from the sidelines. Thanks for watching a video and subscribe the channel now for more updates. Thanks.